Hello, Mixmay here. I figured given my past vlogs talking about bigotry, I want to put my thoughts out there on some of the games I played and thinking about the bigger picture with the messages they tell us. At least specifically, I'll be talking about Clair Obscur Expedition 33 in relation to Ableism, and OMORI in relation to Fatphobia, touching a little bit on some other media too. Obviously, spoilers for the main two games. Let's begin. I should probably preface this coming from a background of doing mashups that the closest thing I did to any of this was back on the Google Plus years. I remember doing a little Outside the Square post series talking about the deeper meaning behind certain songs from video games, or at least those from the Sonic series. What I remember talking about was Supporting Me from Sonic Adventure 2. So as memory serves for that game, Shadow the Hedgehog's only good influence was Maria, and the closest person to remind Shadow of her in the present day was Amy Rose. And the lyrics of Supporting Me as I understood it was about how Shadow was able to honor Maria's wish thanks to Amy, while still being affected by trauma. So to take Supporting Me outside the square, we could say it's a song about anyone who might have had a dark past or dealt with trauma being able to move forward and be a better person because of a positive influence. And taking a number of songs outside the square was what I did over the years. Technically the mashup channel had done this as well, given that some of the mashups I made were in relation to some of my personal circumstances, but I'll talk about that in a future video. But for all of us adults, I think we can agree we can do the same with other media with the messages they may give us, and apply it to the real world. And even then, when we radicalize ourselves understanding bigotry, you understand that when media leaves certain things unresolved, it ends up being a red flag depending on how us as the audience interprets those messages, because bigotry clouds our ability to think critically and understand the bigger picture of why certain opinions in the community, or even what the media outright depicts, isn't okay. Normally you'd think I'd jump into Fatphobia first, but as a change of pace, let's talk about Clair Obscur Expedition 33 and Ableism. If you don't know the game's premise, the long and short of it is the story of Expedition 33, who, like those before, attempts to stop the paintress from painting death in the world. That definitely stands as being one of my favourite games of all time. While the game had some hiccups, it was really good. But naturally, I want to talk about one of the issues that get left open-ended, which is in relation to ableism. But because this game is a journey, I highly recommend you checking it out however you can, watching someone stream or playing it yourself, because this is your last warning on spoilers for the game. Okay? Okay. The reason I bring up ableism in Clair Obscur is in relation to a character we find out to be permanently disabled nearing the end of the game, Mayel, or rather, Alicia. At the same time, you realize the entire world you explored prior actually takes place in a magical painting made by painters in the real world, specifically a painting that Verso, Mayel's brother, made. And basically, all the characters in that painting, except for Mayel and the aforementioned paintress, aren't real. Those from the real world can jump into the paintings and enter its universe as a visitor. Kinda like Super Mario 64, except the painters could also create and destroy things if they wanted to. For Mayel, however, when she jumps into Verso's painting, she accidentally carves a new identity and forgets about her real life self due to the magical properties the painting has, forgetting that she too is a painter. And it's important to address that in the real world, Mayel was permanently disabled due to a fire that happened to also kill Verso. She partially lost her sight, she can't speak, but in a reincarnated form you could say she's a normal teenage girl. But we learned that if you from the real world stay in the painting for too long, your health will drastically worsen, and the reason Mayel jumped in at all was because she was asked to help bring her mother, Lynne, who is the paintress, back out of the painting. While the mum wasn't damaged by the fire like Mayel was, she took the loss of Verso badly, and unable to move on, jumped into his painting to grieve, as well as creating painted versions of her real life family members, including Verso. And at the end of the game, a clash between Mayel and the painted version of Verso happens. Either Mayel stays in the painting, accepting the risks of staying there, repeating what her mum did, being like a goddess living a whole new life that gives her genuine freedom, but with Verso being damned with immortality and essentially being trapped against his will because he can't kill himself, or Verso forces Mayel to go back to the real world to accept his death and move on with her life by destroying the painting himself. And it's a tough predicament. From seeing how people talked about the endings online, a lot of people would have favoured Verso's ending where Mayel lives in the real world and is able to move on from his real world death, as anyone should. But we have to acknowledge the reality that Mayel would be at the whim of real world ableism. Because in reality, yes, it would be good for Mayel to move on from Verso and live in the real world. It would be good to have the whole family heal their relationship with each other. Do you really think that means anything though if the real world won't cater to disabled people? If they treat disabled people with such hostility? Because ideally, Renoir would likely try to make life worthwhile for Mayel. After all, he really wanted the family back together, but on top of overcoming the trauma everyone faced, as well as the conflict the family had with another group, known as the Riders that were responsible for Verso's death, confronting ableism would be something that has to happen, and I don't think real-world Verso would have understood that entirely either, because what's the point of living a life to love if the world won't allow people deemed different to live their life like everyone else can? Remembering too that Lynne and Clair, the latter being Mael's real-world sister, have stated indirectly or directly that they harbour resentment towards Mael for having been deceived by the Riders that led to the very fire that killed Verso. Mael was a child, a minor, and unfortunately, as I've heard from my VR chat travels, parents that resent their kids for whatever reason do exist in the real world, and when your existence is something that society wants erased, like being disabled, the hate gets amplified. Which goes into the whole conversation about ableism in the real world. And I know I'm not the best person to talk about this, but this is where we need to think about the bigger picture, understanding how society treats disabled people in the world. From what I heard from those who speak out online, society is actively trying to make our lives worse by assuming we can function like everyone else if we really tried, and all that. And according to the higher-ups to my understanding, social media has supposedly made people believe they are disabled when they are actually lazy. And it's not good when disability benefits give less money for that reason, meaning disabled people don't have enough to actually be able to live a decent life. It's in a similar way of how bigoted narratives in other contexts are the ones the world wants you to hear, similar to the ones that encourage hate towards trans or fat people. To my understanding, a lot of the hate towards disabled people bounces back to the topic of eugenics, where essentially society wants survival of the fittest, not caring about those who don't fit the norm. People will throw disabled people, even if they're loved ones or family members, under the bus because they believe they're a burden to society. And recalling what I heard back in history classes in high school, I remember being told about how Nazi Germany sent disabled people, among others, into gas chambers to kill them because they were deemed unworthy of life. And you really have to ask yourselves, going back to Clair Obscur, if we genuinely want Mael to get better were she a disabled minor living in the real world, are we willing to help her live that life to love? And to that end, are we doing the same to our disabled family members, loved ones or friends in the present, or are we throwing them under the bus because we believe society's narratives that strongly imply disabled people are a burden and should not exist? Remembering that at least in the time Clair Obscur takes place, it was in the late 19th or 20th century, where bigotry as a whole was exponentially worse, remembering what I said about Nazi Germany. And I believe until Renoir, the rest of the family, and to that end, the world back then actually cared about disabled people instead of believing they shouldn't exist, we can't say in good faith that Verso's ending was the best choice. I think Mael was damned either way, because whatever outcome we as the players picked, it wasn't going to end well. But between the two evils, it's why I believed Mael's ending was better, because at least, provided she doesn't abuse her painting powers to cheat death or anything like that, she could live her life and die on her own terms. And while my circumstances can't compare to Mael's, I could understand where she's coming from. I wanted to live and die doing the things I enjoyed doing, even if it wasn't exactly the healthiest, let alone the best choices out there, but that's a story for another time. And it's interesting how Clair Obscur is to the other game to talk about for this video, OMORI. That game is about the titular kid who goes on adventures with his friends in the world of Headspace, childlike and innocent, but takes a much darker turn as we play another character called Sunny, and understand he has a lot of anxiety, trauma, and depression to cope with. That game hits me a little more personally than I like to admit for the adult years. It makes you understand, I hope, that mental health is a serious issue and does affect minors, and how it takes a hold on us when left untreated, and I know this was something I would have liked growing up as a teenager. However, the one thing that bothered me naturally was its sprinkles of Fatphobia that was unnecessary in the game. Because I do believe from what I saw, our main protagonist, Sunny, has either body insecurities or an eating disorder, which is never said outright, but we can find evidence in Headspace. And I feel the best way to start talking about this is understanding how Sunny's Headspace came to be. At some stage late in the game, if you took the route where you didn't answer the door when Kel arrived wanting to hang out with you, you start understanding that the characters that appeared in Headspace, like Captain Spaceboy, Sweetheart, and Humphrey, were all inspired by books and toys Sunny grew up with in the real world. One of his chores we had to do in the game was sort out his items and boxes as his family were about to move houses. And it makes sense when us as kids have imaginations go wild, it can turn to a big mashup when we take influence from whatever we see in our day-to-day lives. Like for example, mine would be a big mashup of what I see in the Mario Sonic games I grew up with. But you might understand the concern I'm getting at, because kids should be kids, enjoying playgrounds, toys, socializing, not needing to worry about fatphobia or bigotry at all. And while obviously Sunny had to deal with the trauma over the death of his sister Mari, he also has those body or food insecurities that never got resolved in the game. The first piece of evidence of Sunny having body or food insecurities we actually find in the Faux journal, which is in Pokemon terms similar to the Pokedex in the OMORI universe, and it's specifically the entry you get from defeating one of the food enemies you see in the Orange Oasis, the celery, where Kel remarks, "Did you know that eating celery burns more calories than you get from it?" implying that Sunny has been exposed to conversations in the real world implying it's normal for kids to talk about calories. It should be a given in the real world that kids should not need to know about calories or be exposed to weight talk or fatphobia, and that ideally the adults raising them are able to let them have a healthy lifestyle without having to bring any of that up. But the way the world is doesn't allow them to do that, and clearly the OMORI universe was not immune to that either, which I'll elaborate on later. The second piece of evidence we find in Black Space, specifically in the area called Weathervane Island that you access after defeating Abby, if you take the aforementioned route in the game. And in one of the rooms, you end up encountering, as the wiki put it, a hideous creature, which is implied to be a massively inflated Mari. And the closest thing to an explanation for that is the fact that, as we know from the game, beneath the carefree world of Headspace lies Sunny's more darker thoughts, which tend to be very weird to say the least. But like the celery entry, because they never get elaborated on, it comes off as extremely unnecessary fearmongering that can trigger body or food insecurities to us as the audience. And the only canonical excuse anyone can give for its inclusion is, as I said, Sunny has either body insecurities or a bad relationship with food and picked up bad messages in the real world, which influence what we saw in Headspace and Black Space. We can take it a little further by saying that the original creator of OMORI back in 2012 had a blog that was an outlet for expressing their own struggles as a teenager that would eventually lead into creating the game. And one of those posts they made specifically said, "Life would be so much better if I didn't look like a potato." And take it from me when I say there are those from my generation I knew who were struggling with fatphobia in high school, even those who were thin or straight-sized. Because we should know at this stage, fatphobia doesn't just affect fat people anymore. And this is a problem I don't like in media where these types of issues are just there for fear-mongering purposes because of how bad fatphobia has gotten in the world. It comes back around to understanding how fictional media can influence how we act in the real world. If the younger generation, having understood their liking to horror games and especially the first impression OMORI gives off before taking that dark turn, obviously OMORI is not the only media responsible for perpetrating fatphobia, and obviously we have schools and parents in the world adding fuel to that fire. But it's not surprising then when I'm seeing kids and teenagers be horrendously fatphobic on the internet, especially in VR chat and Rec Room, because OMORI does really good in acknowledging the reality of how trauma, depression, anxiety, and mental health declining otherwise affects you as a teenager, and how it at least tries to convince its audience how to, at the bare minimum, start recovering from them if you take the good ending, but also doesn't hold your hand acknowledging that at its worst, it will make you want to and actually kill yourself. They even acknowledge the possibility that trauma can make you a bad person if left unresolved, as real-world Aubrey was shown to be. But to incite another issue without resolving it, let alone confronting it like Sunny's body or food insecurities, doesn't help us as the audience either. Because when you pair it with the messages we get from the real world, even if video games and other media are meant to be an escape from that world, you can't escape fatphobia no matter how much you try. And OMORI was no different. Because you have to understand, when creators include fatphobia in whatever media they create, it's an intentional choice. It's one thing if the creators of OMORI had wanted to confront fatphobia in the storyline at some point, but to just include it without any explanation is going to cause more harm than good. I wouldn't want to wind up in the OMORI community to find out, oh god, everyone's fatphobic, because for a game that centers on mental health, I would expect that they would not tolerate harassment or bigotry of any kind, especially if kids are sneaking on the internet when they're not supposed to be on there. But if even the creators of not just OMORI, but any other media in the whole world can't do that, yeah, my generation, the ones prior, fucked up badly. Because we don't take fatphobia seriously enough, which I'll talk about at the end. And I've seen fatphobia present in Sonic games, Ruby, Break Frontier, their communities. One World VR chat of Undertale had a weight loss ad which should concern you. I even heard the LGBT groups aren't welcoming of fat people who should be part of it, which is weird when you understand that all forms of bigotry intertwine, as I always say. It's in a similar way I spoke about multiple times on this channel in context of the real world, where I've seen other media put messages out there like, don't bully people because they're different, be kind to everyone, or make allegories to bigotry or abuse, but then include a character of a particular identity that openly gets mocked or played for laughs to imply they're the exception. In the context of Fatphobia, the TV series Manifest was one example that stuck out before Astra debuted later on, considering one part of the plot was a huge allegory to bigotry and discrimination. South Park, I heard, helped raise awareness of serious issues in the world. I'm sure there's others I can't think of. But unless they outright told you, yes, you need to be inclusive of people with these identities as well, the audience is not going to put two and two together. It's why I appreciated the game By Sweet Carol, because the Fatphobia present actually had a purpose and led somewhere positive. It actually did put the message out there, mental health matters, you shouldn't bully anyone, and that includes fat people. Because, incoming spoilers for the game, it initially began when we encounter Miss Fisher in the game, who does play off the fat monster stereotype, but we find out she was bullied by her peers in that very place prior to the events of the game. That led into our main character Lana not just helping her find closure, but realizing one of her classmates, Amanda, needed help as well, facing bullying probably similar to what Miss Fisher had in her youth. Going back to OMORI, however, if you want to know what I believe the creators could do to resolve its fatphobia in the game, it shouldn't be controversial to say, but proves why I speak out against fatphobia in the first place, is having in canon that as Sunny recovers from his trauma following the good ending, he would recover his relationship with his body and food as well, gaining a bit of weight in the process as a sign of him healing. And I spoke about this in the past vlog. That's what some people who have struggled with eating disorders and body insecurities have done when their struggles were due to fatphobia's influence, and it should be something I would like artists to do with other characters who struggled similarly by depicting them positively having gained weight. Even if you look past the fatphobia in the game, there are some people who take antidepressants for depression, and as a side effect, some people do gain weight from it, and you have to keep that in mind if we want Sunny to recover. I should know, because when I had to take a higher dose of antidepressants more recently, to my surprise, I gained weight even when I thought I wouldn't. On the side, another character that comes to mind is Six from Little Nightmares, because the first game, I heard someone's theory that the story involved confronting body standards in the world, and that Six potentially has an eating disorder herself, though admittedly it's been a long time since I've seen anything relating to it. But if that were all true, she would have to recover in the same way I proposed about Sunny. Obviously, it's dangerous territory to talk about minors and how their bodies change, especially as an adult, and especially more so in the world we live in that actively encourages the hate of fat people and weight gain. So saying something like Sunny and Six may gain weight ends up being a statement that gets me sent to the guillotine. There are abusers out there without a doubt who try to take what I say out of proportion, even try to use my past affiliation with fetishism to try and prove their point, to say I'm fetishizing minors. And even when I say right now that's not the case at all, they're still going to drive that narrative because their hate for fat people is that extreme, in the same way with how what happened in VR chat got blown out of proportion. Again, this is why I speak out against fatphobia and what Exposing Fatphobia Part 2 is going to talk about. Do you think those slandering me and lying about me are actually paying attention to the kids and adults who are bullying others driven by fat hate to a point it traumatizes them? Do you not think the way society pushes weight loss into the world to a point you may as well call it a fetish, and is basically everything we're accusing the fetishism community to be? Do you not see the hypocrisy that allows abuse to thrive because of both the obsessions of thinness and hating fat people? Because if it's getting to a point we can't acknowledge the reality that there are people out there in the real world, like Sunny and Six, who may need to gain weight to be healthy again, without the majority thinking that's weird or inappropriate, let alone acknowledge that fat shaming has killed and traumatized adults and minors alike, as I spoke about in the past, then again, my generation, the ones prior, fucked up badly to let fat hate get to this extreme. Someone better out there say what I said. Sure, but by no means we should be translating characters should gain weight as a sign of recovering from canonical struggles to we're fetishizing them, and abusers will intentionally blur the line between the two to justify slandering me. And with how deep the roots go with fatphobia, it's going to take time to unlearn the messages that were pushed onto us as a society, but it doesn't change the fact that in the meantime, much the same with other forms of bigotry, even kids can be complicit in murdering their classmates or randoms on the internet by just making them either afraid of being fat or gaining weight, or that they outright encourage fat shaming others to a point that leads to victims self-harming or attempting suicide, because we let the hate for fat people get to this extreme. And it's hard when obviously, yes, kids are kids, we need to give them compassion when they do bad things, as I said before, But when abusive adults, be it parents or a society, are encouraging those abusive behaviors, there's no way any of this gets better until we confront fatphobia at the source and let people exist without worrying about weight gain or being fat. And it bounces back to every person with some form of authority. Parents, teachers at schools, moderators of communities, HR in workplaces, to make that happen. For any of you to ignore fatphobia for whatever reason makes you complicit in it too. But to finish off on the topic of fatphobia, I also want to elaborate on what I mentioned in the last vlog about Ganyu from Genshin Impact also being a character who struggles similarly with body insecurities or an eating disorder. The first red flag, well, not obvious at the first glance, is in the character demo or trailer of her, where the first few sentences have a monologue about a certain sweet flower that's known to be high in sugar content and therefore unhealthy. But the rest is found in one of her biography entries where it explains that Ganyu has to restrict herself from eating food because, on top of her being a vegetarian, there was an incident where a monster tried to eat her and choked on her, underestimating her size. It should be a sign by now it's lazy writing, and similar to Sunny in 6, depicting Ganyu gaining weight as a sign of recovering from those insecurities would be positive empowerment. It's also why for a brief time I did a very loose Blender edit of Ganyu being fat, because I know someone in my VR chat travels who struggle with body image would have liked to have seen that of them. And it should go without saying that there can be vegetarians and vegans out there who are fat too. When you think about it, Clair Obscur and OMORI sound pretty similar, where Mael and Sunny are kids who are disabled in their own way and finds peace in another world. But in order to live in the real world, they would absolutely need support from others to traverse a world that may not allow them to live otherwise. Because Sunny would need help overcoming his trauma even after the events of the good ending, because as much as we wish trauma was a magic fix, it takes time, as well as depression and anxiety, and we can say the same to other characters like Shadow the Hedgehog. Sunny may also gain weight post-recovery if he took antidepressants and fixed his relationship with his body and food, and I would like to hope that the rest of his friends wouldn't act weird over it if it had happened, much the same with Ganyu. As for Mael, it's hard when you're physically disabled to navigate through a world that is much more hostile to you. At the least, we can only hope that Renoir and the rest of his family, assuming the canon ending was Verso forcing her out of the painting, would give Mael the support she needs to live her best life. At the very least, she could potentially, as I understood, still paint, which I don't know the details about whether painting would be a financial job in itself, but there would be a lot more accommodations to be made if we want Mael to live a life in the real world as opposed to just surviving. And like Shadow and Sunny, it would take a while to recover from the trauma she faced. And apply all what I said to the real world. If you understood Mael and Sunny's struggles as disabled kids, if you understood Shadow the Hedgehog's trauma, if you understood Sunny and Ganyu's body and food insecurities and where they stem from, you can be open-minded about the people in your life as well struggling similarly with any of them. If you understood any of the messages fictional media told you, whether they outright mention serious themes or are allegories to them, you should be able to apply it to your lives too. And then it poses the questions I've mentioned multiple times in my past vlogs. If you're genuinely willing and wanting to be a good person in the world for the time you have, are you willing to stay open-minded as you grow older? Or are you going to fool yourself in believing that, oh, I advocate for XYZ, that's good enough for me? Are you going to speak out against the things you do because you genuinely want to be a good person? Or are you pretending to care about them to fool everyone else into thinking you're a good person? Are you genuinely upholding the morals and beliefs you claim to have pertaining to being a good person, whether you're part of a religion, fighting against bigotry, or honoring your loved ones? Or are you quick to abandon them just to hurt someone you don't like? Because if you fall into the oars of every single question I just posed, you can't be bullshitting you're a good person. Ever. And that's a hypocrisy that hits a lot more personally I'd like to talk about in the future. Because some of you will gladly kill or traumatize kids like Mael or Sunny just to stroke your fragile egos because of how bigotry or your ego built on harming other people clouds your ability to be a good person.